As deck builders, we often find ourselves seeing so many potential commanders that are brought into this world. I find myself brewing a lot of them, and I really enjoy brewing most commanders. Some commanders are pretty straightforward with how they should be built around. Even if the strategy is weird or different than most, you usually can find a way to build something. Some are so straightforward, there's really only one way to brew the actual commander. But some commanders that I try to build are just too difficult or weird for me, and offer a huge challenge when it comes to deck building. They seem to be pulling in too many different directions or don't quite have a lot of support behind the strategy I'm looking to brew. I brew a lot of commander decks, and anyone following my Mox Field probably sees the many decks I create every few days. Some people that are super attentive might even see some decks pop up, get brewed, and get deleted the very same day. Oftentimes I'm sparked with some creativity of a new commander that I've found, a new commander I've seen on EDHREC, a commander I've seen on YouTube, or even a commander that just recently got leaked. I like taking a crack at brewing them, and sometimes I'm not successful. In most cases, I just leave the commander from there and don't really worry about trying again. But that isn't always the case. Sometimes a commander sticks with me, and I feel defeated almost, wanting to make the creature work for a deck and trying over and over to craft the perfect 99 cards. As they say, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And that is exactly what I did with the commander today. But before we get into that, I must talk about why we are visiting this commander. This commander in particular has taught me a valuable lesson. That is, 1, every commander is possible to brew. It just might take a few tries. And 2, it's time for you, yes, you, the person I'm talking to right now, to revisit those brews that you have been putting off. If I give commanders multiple tries, it's time for you to give some commanders multiple tries. So let's talk about this commander that I have chosen, Rocco, Street Chef. Now, what intrigued me so much about Rocco is, 1, I really enjoy this character. I already have a Rocco Cabaretti Caterer deck that is a pretty high power deck. So I already really enjoyed the character, and when I first saw this from the Aftermath set, I actually was super intrigued by its design. Rocco Street Chef is a Naya color commander that says at the beginning of your instep, each player exiles the top card of their library. Until your next instep, each player may play the card they exiled this way. Whenever a player plays a land from exile or casts a spell from exile, you put a 1/1 counter on target creature and create a food token. When you read this card, there's a lot of ideas that might pop up. Maybe you want to make an exile deck. Maybe you want to make a group hug deck. Maybe you want to make a food tokens deck. And maybe you want to make a 1/1 counters deck. This commander can go in so many different directions, and it's really hard to choose which direction you actually want to go into. It saw a little bit of play in some constructed formats, but not a lot. But despite that, it's actually pretty popular in Commander, ranking in the top 200 decks on EDHREC. Now, in most cases when you look at this deck, it kind of goes one of two ways. You either really play into the exile side of things, or you really play into the +1/+1 counter side of things. There are some people that like to play tokens, and there are some people that like to play food. I tried to make it work a lot, but no matter how many times I brewed this, it never just seemed to work. There wasn't really good functionality with it, and it just seemed clunky and like it was going in two different directions. Oftentimes when I was brewing Strafon, my first deck, I got the same exact issues. Does this deck want to be an artifact creation deck? Or does this deck want to be a vampire aggro deck? Sometimes it seems like it was pulling in too many different directions, and it became pretty difficult to brew the deck accordingly. This deck had the same problem. I tried really hyping into the exile package that exists with a lot of these Aftermath cards, but no matter how many times I brewed it, it just didn't seem to work. So what I did was I gave up. I gave up trying to brew this deck, and I just moved on to something else and bigger and better projects. But every couple of months, I would come back to this deck. I would think, how can I actually play this deck properly? How can I actually find a way to make this commander work, as I am super intrigued by its design? There's so many different ways that you can build it, and in many ways that could be pretty bad, but in other ways I think that's very intriguing and super unique to this commander. Not only do I love the art, I love the character, but the design was cool enough that it kept me interested. So every couple of months I would come back to it, try again, and fail. So how did I eventually find a way to make this commander something interesting and something that actually can function in a game of Commander? Well, to actually answer that, we have to go back to one of my older decks, Ishai Tana. Now, if you stick with me, I promise this will make sense as to why I'm bringing up this deck. This deck was something that I titled my magnum opus. When I first made this deck, it was a combat trick based deck around Tana, with Ishai being the distraction. I had this deck in person for quite a while, and it was a ton of fun to play, and it was, for a minute, my most powerful deck. It got consistent results and was able to do a lot with the resources that it had. After a long time of playing it though, I seemed to almost get lost in the sauce with that deck, and I started to rely on Ishai a lot more and Tana a lot less. But because of that, most of the draw effects in that deck were based around Tana, so I found myself losing a lot more games than I was winning. From there, because I didn't really enjoy playing the deck and I feel like I forgot completely how to play it, I took it apart. But that deck also intrigued me, and so I went back to that deck with a more Ishai focused instead of Tana focused. Ishai is not the only card that has this effect. Cards like Torian Mauler and Managorger Hydra also have this effect, where they love putting +1/+1 counters on themselves when other people cast spells. Forgotten Ancient is pretty similar, but this is when everybody casts a spell. So I decided for the first time ever to actually make a +1/+1 counters kind of deck. Now this was cool. I had never really built a +1/+1 counters kind of deck simply because I never really thought it was that powerful. But as I brew more and more of this, I actually really enjoyed the idea of it. There was only one issue. There was pretty much only 3 to 4 blue cards that actually would work in a strategy like this, and you had no inherent advantage in the command zone besides the fact that you had one of your outlets there. But since it is your commander, and since it is the main engine of the deck, it gets targeted a lot. So I decided to once again kind of scrap going back to Ishai Tana. And this is where we come full circle back to Rocco Street Chef. If you really whittle down Rocco's ability, it essentially says your opponents get more card advantage. However, when they play a spell, you get to create a food token and put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. Now, this is very similar to Ishai's ability. Opponents cast spells, you put +1/+1 counters on it. However, Rocco not only gets to choose which creature gets this, but he also provides advantage in the command zone in the fact that you get to exile cards from yourself as well. The food tokens are also nothing to laugh at. There are some artifact synergies that you can put into this deck. So with the brewing strategy of Ishai Tana +1/+1 counters, but the commander of Rocco, I have finally found the list that I have enjoyed the most and that I'm starting to test out in person. Because I decided to explore the boundaries of deck building and because I didn't give up on this commander, I have found a deck that actually works and that I really enjoy. This is why the entire main point of this video is for you, yes you, to go retry a commander that might have intrigued you in the past and give it another shot. With that being said, let's jump into the deck. Let's talk about what it wants to do. Let's talk about some key card choices, and let's talk about how you can build a version of your own. So this deck is a +1/+1 counter deck. It wants to put a lot of counters on your creatures. You want creatures that already get +1/+1 counters, and you want to make very big threats. The problem that Ishai Tana had is that there were only a few creatures that truly got the advantage they needed. Yes, Ishai has that effect, and yes, there are some other creatures that have that effect as well. However, once those threats are dealt with, there's really no way to keep going. You don't have a lot of other creature threats. So we needed something else. This deck has 33 creatures. This means you could potentially have 33 Ishai type effects. You can pump any of these creatures, whether they are utility or they get bigger on their own. Because of this, we really enjoy this commander a lot more, as this is a much better +1/+1 counters deck and it's much more dynamic than Ishai Tana. So, +1/+1 counters. We want our creatures to get as big as possible. We obviously have the doublers like Branching Evolution, Hardened Scales, Ozolith, and many others that allow us to double these counters. We have a lot of cards that allow us to put counters onto creatures so that Rocco is not the only way to pump up our creatures. And of course, we still have those crazy effects like Managorger Hydra, Torian Mauler, and Wildwood Scourge. Our +1/+1 counter tag is the greatest part of this deck with 23 cards in it. My actual MVP of this is the Herd Baloth. You could potentially make 4/4 green beast every single turn cycle with this card, which is why it's my MVP. Now, on the draw side of things, we have some hard draw in this deck. It's not all exile, simply because we would like to have at least some cards in hand. So, what are our draw effects? Aerial Extortionist not only allows us to get more +1/+1 counters with its effect, but also allows us to draw cards with its effect. Benny Brax is one of the great food token payoffs that we can put in there. In most cases, when our opponents are casting from exile, we make a food if Rocco's on the battlefield, which means we get to draw a card. Inspiring Call is great, as for 3 mana, you can easily draw up to 5 to 6 cards. Cutzel is great because 1, it shuts off our opponents on our turn from interacting, but also allows us to draw some cards because of our +1/+1 counters. And of course, Toski is just a great thing to put our +1/+1 counters on and draws us some extra cards a turn. In our exile package, we have quite a few really great options. One of the biggest mistakes I made when I first tried making this deck is by adding just every single exile effect out there. The reason that this is not necessarily ideal for a deck like this is the fact that you don't have nearly as many payoffs when you focus more on the exile than the +1/+1 counters. With that being said though, we still have a lot of great exile effects in this deck, and I tried to make sure that every single one had some sort of upside to the fact that we do exile. Things like cheating cost, giving us back mana, dealing damage, or allowing us to play extra lands are the types of exiles that we're looking to have in this deck. And I think this package is a really great one. Now, moving on to the ramp package, it's fairly simple. We have some artifact ramp, we have some creature ramp, and we're actually running Knight of the Sweet's Revenge, which can be a game winner when we get to the late game. One of my favorite cards in this ramp package is the Axguard Artisan. This allows us to potentially make 3 to 4 treasure tokens every single turn cycle, netting us a ton of mana, which is pretty great in something like this. Moving on to the removal package, we actually don't have a lot of removal in this deck. Most of it is to get rid of enchantments and artifacts that we might run into, but for the most part, we don't have a ton of removal necessary in a deck like this. It's meant to be in a more casual setting, and so we kind of lay low on the amount of removal we run, and most of the removal is here to be as efficient as possible. And lastly, we're moving on to the value section. This value section is just a couple of cards that can help us play the game just a little bit easier. Swiftfoot Boots allows us to keep Rocco under protection. Layla not only allows us to get bigger, but also helps us exile even more cards. Doubling Season doubles not only our +1/+1 counters, but also our food tokens. Balin takes control of, once again, +1/+1 counters, draw, and mana. And Annie Joins Up allows us to not only deal 5 damage to something, but also allows Rocco to trigger twice, both times, triggering not only for our +1/+1 counters, but also our instep trigger. Annie Joins Up is probably the key card in this entire deck. If you draw Annie Joins Up, you must play it, as it provides so much value for the deck itself. This deck has been the biggest example and lesson learner for me on why I will never give up on any commanders in the future. Not every commander has to be the most powerful commander out there. Not every commander has to be extremely powerful and CEDH viable. And not every commander has to be solved in the first build. Some commanders do have interesting things to them, and this commander especially, although it took me a couple tries, is going to become a very fun part of my lineup. So, once again, the main point of this video is for you. Yes, you. I am hoping to inspire you to go work on and go brew up a deck that you might have been putting off or have maybe tried in the past and it just didn't seem to work out. This is your sign to give that deck another shot. If you are at all interested in this deck, you can check it out in the description below in my Moxfield link. And if you have enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. I have been Deck Driver, and I hope to see you guys all next time.